Dr. Joy, since the film's release, what's changed? Do you feel like the world is moving closer to accountability, or are we just getting better at masking bias under the banner of innovation?
One thing since the film came out, every time I see it or we screen it, it feels like it could have come out yesterday.
Yeah.
Right. The topics are so relevant. And I think since the film came out, because AI has been increasingly adopted, more people now understand, right, or are starting to have a better understanding of the impact and implications. So we've had a mixed bag overall. I think we saw probably in 2019, 2020, there was this recognition, particularly for facial recognition technologies, that due to inaccuracies, at the very least, it probably shouldn't be used, but also some of those civil rights implications as well. I do think we're in another moment now, especially with the introduction of generative AI systems and the billions of dollars of investment in some of the leading AI companies, where people are not pausing, right, to think about what could go wrong. And so you very much have this race for supremacy.
Do you see African technologists learning from these global lessons, or are we at risk of replicating the same patterns of exclusion within our own systems?
Yeah, so I see that being replicated because there's something that somebody said, like the builder of the technology they're human, they have their own biases. I think the only thing I would quote is I think it was Toni Morrison who said something about, now that you know better, do better, or something like that. Now that you know that there's biases in terms of how we code and add it into, like, our biases added into the code, then how do we recognize that?
What would a truly global and just framework for accountability look like?
I think we need to ask ourselves, do we have real global frameworks for regulating emerging technology? Because when you say the word global, what connotation does that have? It usually means looking towards the West, looking towards the global North to tell us what the standards are. It's very rare to have African voices, leave alone Kenyan voices, in there also contributing to what global is. What are we doing about African AI? When AI comes to us, because we are majority consumers, what are the systems that we have in place? What policies, what regulations do we have in place? Only recently have we been starting to work on regulations and policies around AI. And even in the policy-making process, I can tell you it's difficult to have the African context included there.
So what does meaningful governance look like in the African context?
I think we have to first start with, what are we using it for in order to understand how to build good regulations around it. We have to think about users first. Users normally are not mapped as major stakeholders. We also have to think about what role are we wanting to play in that ecosystem. There's also bias that exists that is external from the bias that's from the global north, right? The gender issue, the language issue, right? Some of these we're not tackling, I think, robustly enough.
We seem, at least the innovation seems to be moving faster than policy and governance can. So then how do we navigate that challenge?
That is a fact that we have to be comfortable with. And essentially, if we accept that, then we can work with innovators in terms of creating regulations, policies that help them to continue to innovate, but also are not being harmful to others. So there's no one-size-fits-all regulation or regulation solution. It must always flow with context. We need to have broad-based principles around how we will deal with emerging tech as well, so that we can be flexible or agile as people are innovating to ensure that the broad-based principles are being implemented. But please, let's not copy-paste principles from the North or the West or wherever. Let's come up with, let's start from the users and the innovators up to figure out what those principles would be.
I think what's interesting about the journey we see in coded bias is, at the end of the film, there still were no regulations in the US, federal regulation with facial recognition. Amazon stopped selling to law enforcement. So did IBM, so did Microsoft, all of the US-based companies that we audited, because we were using other levers beyond policy. we're still fighting for those regulations on the state side, but it also showed me that policy works in other types of ways. So you might not necessarily get a national law passed, but we saw quite a bit of success with state laws. And I was coming in from an event called Vision and Justice, where you had Sherilyn Ifill, who used to be a chief counsel for the Legal Defense Fund with the NAACP. And so they are a historic organization fighting for civil rights in the United States. And she said, as a lawyer, oftentimes they've needed the artists and the storytellers, because even if you get laws to change, if you don't get attitudes to change, you haven't necessarily gone the full distance. So I think it's so important to say, oh, we all have different elements here that we bring.
How can that same creativity be used to make AI more inclusive and culturally grounded?
For it to be more inclusive, then you need to do not include the community that you want to serve as an afterthought. We have a voter registration process that is going on in Kenya, and for the first time, we're being asked for facial recognition.
Oh.
Yep. And for me, it is a question of like, one, what are you going to do with the data? Why? But did they include us as Kenyans to ask us and tell us? Hence, what that data could be used for could be very risky. So for me, that's one example of, if you don't include me, then I face the risk of being harmed later. And sometimes without even me knowing that I should be included,
I do spend a lot of time with AI developers because I wanted to first map out what African AI is. And I found out that many AI developers are not building models, they're collecting data. And fine. And thank you, Joy. Oh my gosh, I need to tell you, thank you so much for saying data is destiny and not data is the new oil. Thank you. Yes. I was like, thank you so much. However, when you ask yourself who is making the decision about collecting language data on the continent, it is not Africans. It is the people who are funding AI, and in the documentary we heard that it's usually big tech. So if you were to collect an experiment, if you were to collect your mother tongue, your native language, where would you go to?
To the village.
And that is literally what people were doing. They go to the village to collect African language data. Do they explain to these people what they are collecting the data for? Are they even compensating them? Some of them are, but the compensation is like $5 somewhere there. It's really ridiculous.
In comparison to how much the company that will benefit from the data will make from the system.
Why would big tech invest in collecting African language data sets if there is no profit at the end of it? These people are not involved in any shape or form other than it being extractivism.
I don't think I like the word inclusion anymore because, like you're saying, it feels performative. What we're really looking for is agency and ownership, right? When you look at the work you've been doing with your activism and artistry, how does that fit into storytelling and driving systemic change around AI and justice?
I realized that the research papers, even one of the most cited papers, right, in the field, is only going to reach so many people. So I had to go from the performance metrics of saying these are how various algorithms performed on different tests, different benchmarks, and so forth, to performance arts. Why do these numbers matter? Why do these differences, these disparities matter? And I found in the halls of Congress, testifying and so forth, that it was often the art that opened people's eyes. And then we had the numbers to back it up. The film is doing that storytelling work as well, which is very much humanizing what it means when we're talking about AI harm.